Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Just Here to Vibe. As per usual, I'm your host, Miranda, and thank you for joining me on the podcast where you and I work through the insanity that is life one day at a time. So for today's topic, we'll be diving into the practice of manifestation. So I feel like if you've been anywhere in the wellness or spiritual space, especially in the past 2 to 3 years, you have in some way, shape, or form encountered the idea of manifestation. You may have more commonly seen it referred to as some of the practices around manifestation, so those being things like law of attraction, vision boarding, scripting, all of which we'll dig into a little bit later. But today I really wanted to dig into manifestation, look at what it is, if there's any science behind it, what are some of the techniques and ideas around manifestation, and sort of why it's become such a huge deal in the past couple of years. So to start off with, I feel like we just need to identify what manifestation even is. So at a base level, manifestation is the concept that your thoughts can alter or affect your reality, or allowing you to create something or turn an idea into reality. So said another way, it's essentially just aspirational thinking with the purpose of turning those thoughts into something tangible in the material world. So for most people, I think when you look at manifestation, you see a lot of talk around this, particularly in the realms of material growth. So gaining money, getting a new job, or relationships. So manifesting your soulmate or perfect person. And I think one of the funniest things about manifestation is even though there's a general agreement on what manifesting is, what no one can really agree on is the rules or limitations around it. So I've heard some people say, manifestation should be easy, it should be flowing, and it's just you sort of connecting with the universe. And then there's the other end where it's like, no, you have to be very rigid. There are a lot of rules and practices you have to have in place or else your manifestations aren't going to work. The idea is that everything has a frequency. So people, money, other material goods. And the thought is that if you align yourself with the frequency of the thing that you want, then the thing will naturally be attracted to your life and therefore come to you. So I feel like it's important to note my personal history with manifestation. I'm pretty sure that I first heard about the concept through this book, The Secret, which was also then eventually turned into a production that was on Netflix for a while. So the book was originally published in 2006 by Rhonda Byrne, who is an Aussie TV producer. And you might be like, okay, it's kind of weird that one of the biggest books around the idea of manifestation came from a TV producer and not a spiritual practitioner, which I think is where a lot of criticism comes from. Is it's one of those things where even though manifestation, I think, really focuses a lot on the spiritual world, and so you'll see it in circles where spirituality is more common, it is one of those things that is very much leaked out into the mainstream, and it's one of those things that has crossed the border from being this sort of new age witchy woo-woo type thing to being something that's not necessarily commonly accepted, but very, very well known, regardless of how into other spiritual practices you are or not. But going back to my personal history with it, at the time when I had first come across The Secret, I didn't connect the dots knowing that what this book or this show were talking about was manifestation. That was just not the term I knew it as. But since then, through my own spiritual journey, I've come across and played around with a lot of different manifestation techniques over the years. I do want to talk a little bit about, where I sort of sit on the topic collectively a little bit towards the end, but I figured there's some other background that I think is important for you guys to have before we get into my own personal beliefs on the topic. So I think the next thing that's important to look at is why people would be drawn to manifestation. I think if you're someone who is not a believer, people don't really understand how people would buy into this ideology, and I think it's important that we get into the mindset, regardless of where you stand on the topic, of why people are drawn to this practice in the first place. And I think a lot of it ultimately has to do with this human sense of needing to control things and feeling like we want to have confirmation of the fact that we do have some control over our own lives and we can impact things. Or I think a big thing with manifestation and is they're really drawn to this idea of what if the only thing standing between you and your perfect life or this life you never thought you could have is your thoughts? What if everything is already in place for you to get the life that you feel like you deserve or the life that you want, and the only thing that's really stopping you is yourself? I think a lot of people in theory find that really empowering, and they're like, oh, if I can just change my mindset and how I approach things, then I can have everything that I ever wanted. On top of that, a lot of people either have this idea that they know what they want or they feel like they know what they should want, but just can't seem to get it. And this could be, again, anything from feeling really financially insecure a lot of the time to having trouble finding a good long-term dating partner. But for one reason another, they just can't seem to bring that thing into their life. And so I think manifestation provides this really unique opportunity for them to have this seemingly simple fix that they feel like they can actually work on. And so it feels like, oh, okay, this is very tangible. If I just change my mindset, I'm gonna get the thing. So as opposed to like climbing this metaphorical mountain where this thing they want seems so in the distance and like it could never be possible for them, it makes them feel like they're taking a tangible step to getting the thing that they want. So I think the next important thing for us to talk about are some common manifestation practices. So I feel like manifestation is one of those things that sounds really woo-woo and high level, and you're like, okay, but how do you manifest? What does manifestation actually look like in practice? So today I want to go over like 5-ish just real quick things so that when you were hearing of these practices, you understand how they're supposed to connect to manifestation as a whole. So the first one is law of attraction. And I feel like when people think of manifestation, a lot of people mentally jump to law of attraction first. And that's because due to books like The Secret, it was one of the practices that became really mainstream when manifestation was first sort of becoming bigger in the collective. So if you're unaware of what law of attraction is, it's basically the suggestion that positive thoughts bring positive results into a person's life, and the opposite is also true. So negative thoughts bring negative outcomes into someone's life. Broken down even further than that, really the basic principle of law of attraction is that like attracts like. So the thought process is that thoughts are a form of energy, and so all energies are always looking to find energies that match their frequency. So therefore, positive energy would bring abundance in all forms. So when people are practicing law of attraction, what they're looking to bring into their life is more positivity. And we'll get into why I think that can be a little bit of a problem later, but in daily practice, this could mean things like being grateful, writing gratitude lists, looking for positives in situations, doing things like positive affirmations, and then also reframing past negative experiences to something that's more positive. And then another common one that you'll have seen, especially on TikTok, I don't know why, but I feel like TikTok has really grasped this practice in particular, is the law of assumption. So the law of assumption basically says that if you have a state of mind that you already are living your dream life and that you already have the things that you want to attract into your life, then those things will be drawn to you. In order to call in your manifestation, you need to live your life like you already have the thing. And I think in a more practical sense, a saying I always heard growing up was dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And it was kind of this really like funny, weird, old way of saying what essentially the law of assumption is. In practice, if you were looking to manifest more money in your life, you would act like someone who already had money. Or if you wanted to be in a loving romantic relationship, you would treat yourself the way you would in a relationship, or you would move through the world like you were in a relationship. So really at its base, it's about switching your mindset into a place of having instead of a place of lacking. And then the next manifestation technique is scripting. So scripting is basically a combination of journaling and the law of assumption. So essentially what you do here is you would journal, but you would write from the point of view of you in the future. So describing what your life is like, what's going on. And this could be about anything. So you talking from the future perspective of, oh, I have this great job now, like here's what I'm doing in the job, here's how I'm acting, here's how I'm feeling. It could be, oh, I just got this house that I really wanted, here's what it looks like, here's the energy I feel around it. Really it can be about anything, but I think the main differentiator in how some people script is some people don't put dates on it, so they're just kind of writing from a vague future point, and other people do attach dates to it. So if I wanted to be living this like dream life or get a new apartment, by the end of the year, I would write from the POV and like put a date at the top and say January 5th, 2023, and then write what I wanted my life to look like at that point. Connected to that is vision boards, and vision boards are basically just visual scripting. It's putting together a collage of images, words, whatever else you want that you want to bring into your life. And so I feel like this one in particular, a lot of people tend to do either at the new year or like other significant time moments. So that you'd make a vision board for, okay, here's what I want 2022 to be like, or here's what I want 2023 to be like. And some people can get really specific with this, where it's like they'll be, have images of like, here's exactly how much money I want to make, or here's, exactly the office I want to be sitting in. plan. But others are more vague with their ideas of what they want, and they're really just cultivating more of, I guess, like a vibe for what they want their life to look like. And then the fifth one I put, so this isn't technically a manifestation technique, but it is related to manifestation, so I thought it was appropriate to include here. And that's angel numbers. Angel numbers, if you don't know, are basically repeating number sequences that are thought to have interpretive messages from your spirit guides or your angels or God or whatever system it is you believe in. And basically, they're supposed to let you know when you're on track or aligning yourself with your manifestation, and can sometimes give you an idea of here's what we want you to know. When we're talking about angel numbers, these sequences can appear in anything. So it could be, you see them in a license plate as you're driving. You see it in a random phone number that you get a call from or need to call. You could see it in gas prices if you wanted to. There's really no limitation of, here is how your angel numbers are supposed to appear. What's more important is the idea that you recognize the pattern. And so each angel number has a different meaning, although there is a little bit of wiggle room in interpretation just based off of like the circumstance you're going through and what you're trying to call in. But I'll give you a couple of examples. So if you see 111, it's basically a sign that's, hey, your manifestation is ready and it's coming in for you really quickly. So like get excited, but also get your ducks in a row because the thing you want is coming for you at a very quick rate. And then another one would be 444. So 444 is thought to mean that your spirit guides are with you. If you were feeling like really alone or lonely and you saw 444, it would be this idea of, hey, you're not walking this path alone, like we're with you, you were supported in what you're doing. I think it's important now to get into, does manifestation actually work? Is there any scientific data? Is there anything that backs up the idea that manifesting does something other than just making you feel better about your life? And so it's interesting in that there hasn't been a ton of studies I could find actually on manifestation and people tracking whether or not doing these manifestation practices consistently actually influenced events in their lives. But there are some things that I think that are important to note in terms of just how some ideologies within manifestation actually do line up with things that we do know about the human brain psychologically. And so I think the first thing to call out is how connected it feels like manifestation is to confirmation bias. Confirmation bias, if you don't know, is basically the tendency for humans to search for, favor, or recall information in a way that confirms beliefs that you already have. So I think a good example of this is if you've ever met someone who's really pessimistic and they're just like, everything is bad, everything always goes wrong for me, like I'm not lucky, and then it feels like bad things are always happening to them or they're always telling you about bad things that happen to them. That's a common example of confirmation bias because this person believes that bad things will happen to them, and so when anything bad does happen to them, because bad things happen to people all the time, even if it's just a minor inconvenience, they're going to use that information to confirm this belief they have that bad things happen to them. And you'll notice in a sort of annoying way, the opposite is also true a lot of the time. I feel like we all have this friend who just seems like the luckiest person on the planet. It feels like everything goes right for them all the time. Somehow things always just magically work out for them. And a lot of the times it weirdly plays into this belief that they have about themselves where they're like, yeah, I am really lucky and I am really fortunate, and then somehow good things happen to them. And then again, it works off the same principle of them taking that information and using it to confirm their own belief about their life. Positive thinking, which is one of the core concepts of manifestation, can be beneficial to your overall mental well-being, not only because it can lead you to using the confirmation bias in a positive way in terms of then being able to see more good things that are happening in your life, but it can also lead to lower instances of depression and better coping mechanisms. So it's sort of this funny thing of how much of what is happening around you is actually directly correlated to your thoughts versus, well, are your thoughts just changing your perception and therefore you see more of what you want to see? I think another interesting thing to point out is we do know, like scientifically, that there is a connection between people who visualize and performance, especially when it comes to athletics. So there was this 2017 study published in Basic and Applied Social Psychology. And basically what the study concluded was that when athletes used a visual exercise to imagine their goal of, improving their performance or winning a match, they were more successful and more likely to beat their opponent and perform better than those who didn't visualize those goals, which I think is really interesting because another big concept concept of manifestation, regardless of which practice you actually utilize, is this idea of visualizing this version of you that exists that has all of these things that you want. And we do know now that there is a correlation between visualization and outcome. I think another interesting thing to point out is a weird sort of side effect of blossoming your own optimism. And the thing about optimism is optimistic people live longer and have better health outcomes than pessimists. So it's another one of those things where it's like, okay, is meditation going to make you live longer? Not necessarily, but the practice of moving through your manifestations could help foster positivity, which then helps you live longer and makes you healthier. I think the next big thing for manifestation is I think it's really helpful in terms of helping people determine clearer goals for themselves. And so a lot of people when they're young and are first trying to figure out who they want to be in life and how they want to show up and what they want, you kind of just go through the motions a lot of the time. And I think what's really useful about manifestation is because of how you're told to work through these practices, it can help you actually determine clearer goals for yourself and allows you the space to really narrow down in on what is it you actually want? What would bring you happiness? What would make you feel fulfilled? And you having to actually put a name to that and put a visual to that. And I think that can be really helpful for people who feel a little lost or downtrodden. And I think it's sort of interesting because manifestation, it feels like really sits at this intersection of confidence and luck. So another thing I've noticed for people who weren't really into manifesting and then worked to, become better at it or use more practical applications of it is that manifestation can often help people untangle this sense of unworthiness and help them sort of dig through why they feel like they don't deserve certain aspects. And that's because so much of manifestation is based around believing in your own worthiness and your own deservingness to have certain things in life. And so I think it presents this really interesting question, and I would love for there to be some study on this in the future. But when it comes to people who manifest, do these people end up having higher confidence in the long run because they have to work through their own thoughts about why they don't deserve something? And I think another important thing for manifestation is it can just help you to identify obstacles. When we're talking about the law of assumption in particular, what I was talking about was that you basically have to live your life like someone who already has the thing that you want. And so it allows you the space to do a lot of reflection on, okay, well, what person has those things? What sort of person has the life that you want? And how does that differ from the person you are now? And how can you create stepping stones to get from this person who you feel like doesn't have this thing to the person who has those things? What does that person do differently? How does that person act differently? It can help you to sort of identify obstacles between where you are and where you want to be. And I think that can be really useful for people who don't know necessarily what step to take to get the things that they want. But now on the flip side, I think it's important to talk about where the sort of concept falls apart and where it just does not work if you think about it too hard. And I think the first thing is and this is sort of a misconception about manifestation as well as just a con, I suppose. But I think it's important to call out that for a lot of situations in life, especially ones that are really tough, thoughts alone aren't enough. While it's great to have positive thinking and there are all of these positive outcomes for you thinking more positively in life, there are decades of scientific research and studies that show that positive thinking, if taken too far, can actually make you more complacent and therefore less likely to muster the effort to achieve goals, which is not good, right? When the whole concept of manifestation is, we can just think our way into doing things. That causes problems if you're just thinking that thinking is the ends and the mean. You cannot just sit at your desk, manifest for a few minutes a day about how you want $1 million, not make any other changes, and then expect to get $1 million. Saying that out loud, that sounds ridiculous. But I feel like sometimes when people go into manifestation, that's how they think it works. And I feel like where we have to be worried is, does this encourage people then to not actually make moves that they need to make to change their circumstances? And they get so tripped up in the idea of just thinking their way out of a situation that they need to act their way out of. I think the next big thing we have to talk about is its intersection with neurodivergence and the mentally ill. So especially when it comes comes to law of attraction and this idea where, well, if you want this thing, you just have to think positively about this thing and you can't think negatively about this thing. As anyone who has ever had any sort of mental illness will tell you, that's terrifying. It is a terrifying thought and like frankly a really terrible thought to put in people's heads that, oh, well, if bad things are happening to you, it's probably because you're thinking bad thoughts, or even worse, that if you think bad thoughts, you're going to attract negative things to you. So for example, like someone with depression who, believes that no one truly loves them could theoretically think that because this thought entered their head, they're now attracting that and it's true, which is really dangerous and really harmful. And it leads to situations where people who don't necessarily always have the best control over their own emotions and thought processes through no fault of their own have these bad things happen to them. And again, using the confirmation bias, that just confirms to them that there are all these terrible things that they think about themselves. So it ends up leading people to self-blame and feel guilty, and that can just end up making people more depressed and anxious, which is the exact opposite of what they're trying to get out of manifestation. And I think we have to go even further than that. And when we talk about, groups of people who over time who have been systematically oppressed and put into positions, again, through no fault of their own, where things are just objectively harder for them. And I think this idea of, oh, well, you can just think your way out of it, or if you just think more positively, it will change, is really disrespectful in a sense, because there is so much going on in life that is outside of our control and things that are not our fault, and through no systems of our own, we get put into these situations. And then you're going to turn around and essentially say, well, if you're in this situation, it's your fault. Like, no, that's not how this works, but that's how a lot of the principles and core beliefs of manifestation come off. It's like the same note of saying, oh, someone died of cancer because they just didn't manifest not having cancer hard enough. Like, no, that's ridiculous. And saying that out loud is ridiculous, but it negates a lot of the principles that it feels like manifestation was built upon. And then going back to something I said earlier, I think what we have to talk about with manifestation is how it inevitably ties to the human need to control things. And it feels like there's so many ways that we as human beings try to justify the things that happen in our lives. So, whether you call it manifestation, whether you say everything happens for a reason, whether you call it karma, whether you call it God's plan, all of these are just different ways and different systems of belief that we use to try to explain what can ultimately feel unexplainable. And oftentimes, it seems like there really aren't reasons for why certain things happen. In manifestation's case, it can sort of be used as this weird blanket coverall for whether or not things go your way and why things go or don't go your way. So if you're manifesting and something good happens to you, it's like, oh, look, great, your manifestation's working, you're doing fantastic. But if you're trying to manifest and things aren't working for you or things are going poorly, it's sort of like, oh, well, you just didn't want it enough, or you're not manifesting right, or, you're thinking negatively, so of course you attracted this negative thing to you. And it just causes a lot of problems when we try to use these blanket systems to explain why good things or bad things are happening to us. Because again, in the best case scenario, it adds this sort of grandiose sense of delusion that you have control over everything in your life if you just think about it hard enough. And in the worst case scenario, you end up taking on a lot of self-blame for things that happened to you that just were not in your control, as so many things aren't. I think another dangerous thing about manifestation then is sort of how manifestation ranks your emotions. And this is something that, it grinds my gears so bad. In certain sectors of spirituality, they talk about frequency, right? Frequency, vibrations, the feeling of things. And when it comes to emotions in particular, it feels like a lot of sectors of manifestation put your emotions into high vibe emotions and low vibe emotions. So low vibe emotions would be things like guilt, shame, fear. And what they tell you is these emotions are bad. And then you have the high vibe emotions, which would be things like love, gratitude, happiness. And they tell you these are the good, quote unquote, emotions. And if you want things to happen in your life that are positive, you have to really only feel these high vibe emotions, and we don't want to deal with, we need to get rid of the low vibe emotions. And I've talked about this in a lot of different podcast episodes, but I think that why this is so annoying for me is because you can't judge your emotions. We've talked about this a million times over in different episodes, but judging your emotions, which again, emotions are just guideposts for how you are reacting to certain situations in your life, is not healthy, and you having this mindset of, well, I shouldn't be feeling these emotions because these emotions are bad, when again they're just telling you how you're reacting to something that's happening to you, is not useful. Yeah, you need to feel those things because those things tell you that something's not right and that you need to change certain things. But if we get into this mindset of, well, we want to basically ignore those emotions, or we don't want to feel those emotions, or like guilting you for feeling those emotions, that doesn't help you make changes that you need to make based off the emotions that you're feeling. So now I've sort of dug through manifestation, what it is, what it looks like. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it even do anything? And so I feel like it would be appropriate to close off with my thoughts on manifestation and whether I, as an individual, thinks it works. And this feels like such a cop-out answer, but I feel like when it comes to manifestation, do I think it works? Sort of, and sometimes. I think the hard thing about manifestation for me is it goes back to this broader idea of not knowing what we do or do not have control over in our life. I think there's a lot of positives around certain aspects of manifestation. So that being things like really clarifying your intentions for your own life and what you want, and then making the changes accordingly. And sometimes that does come down to your mindset. You know, obviously for most things that you want out of life, you're going to have to take steps. But I think so many people try to take those steps without getting their mindset right in the first place. And so I do think there's a lot of good intentions when it comes to this idea of, well, if you want certain things, you need to have a certain mindset. And again, that's not saying that we just negate our negative emotions, but it says, hey, if you are thinking really negatively all the time, or you feel like you don't deserve certain things, yeah, we probably need to do the inner work on why you feel that way so you don't create this self-fulfilling prophecy of you self-sabotaging yourself when you get close to the thing because you feel like you don't deserve to have the thing. And I think even beyond that, there have been some weird examples in my life of how manifesting has actually worked out for me. So when I was first looking to move to LA, I did a scripting manifestation about what I wanted my life in LA to be like. So I did this whole scripting on, here's the apartment I'm living in, like here's how my life is going, here's what the apartment looks like, here's who my roommates are like. And I had set that manifestation, I think, for like 6 months down the line, maybe a little bit longer than that. And so 4 months later, I finally found the place after months of searching that I was gonna live. It was like one of those things where the timing just worked out perfectly of I was sort of able to move whenever, but these girls didn't need someone for a couple of months, so I had time to like help my current roommates find a new roommate. All was good. And the funny thing was, when I moved into this place, I had actually only met one of my roommates at the time. The other one I think was out of town when I was visiting. But it was one of those things where even when my roommate and I were talking, it was very clear that like this was going to work out and we were going to live together because everything just fell into place. We got along really well. The timing was perfect. Like, all was well. And so a few months after I had moved in, so this was maybe like 3-4 months post the scripting date. And I'd kind of forgotten I had written about it because at this point it had been like 10 months since I had even written the script to begin with. But I had found it when I was going through some things, and it was all like to the T what I had scripted. Like the house looked like what I said it was going to look like. My room in particular looked like what I said it was going to look like. The girls that I had like scripted about in my journals being my roommates were very, very similar in personality, I came to find, to the girls that I had moved in with. And so it was one of those weird moments where it's like, okay, you know, did I just confirmation bias my way into this and I'm just drawing all these parallels because I think there are parallels? Or was it one of those things where it's like, no, I scripted this and I was so determined that this is what I wanted that the universe then conspired to give me this thing and find a way for me to like meet these people so I could move in with them. So I guess at the end of the day, I guess what I would leave it on is I do find positive thinking valuable, but I think it's also important to draw lines in the sand where we're focusing on input when we're chasing our goals and not just expecting the output without having done the work. So again, positive thinking and manifesting in a lot of forms is really important because they are things we can control, right? We can control how we're approaching things, how we're thinking about things, but we have to go beyond that and take action to bring the things we want into our lives and not just expect that because we think about them, we're going to get the thing. And I think the perfect example, going back to my first house in LA, is because, yeah, I could script all I wanted about here's the sort of house I want and here are the people I want to live with, but I still have to go out and find the people. I still had to go through Craigslist ads. I still had to go on a ton of other house tours with different people before I found these people. And so the manifestation was a part of that, but so was me actually putting in the work at the end of the day to get what I wanted. But with that, we've reached the end of this week's episode. So let me know your thoughts on manifestation. I feel like it can be one of those things that is very polarizing, even within the spiritual and wellness community itself. So have you manifested anything? Do you want to manifest things? So I'll look out for your guys' comments, but until the next one, I'm your host, Miranda. Thank you for vibing with me on this episode of Just Here to Vibe, and I'll see you then.